English 101 online with Josh. The time to learn is now.
Hey everyone, in this video we're going to chat a little bit about comparison, and I'm going to set you up for your comparison essay, which is our final essay in this class, if you can believe it. And up until this point in the semester, we've primarily been analyzing a single text on its own terms. But now we're kind of switching gears to focus on a new form of analysis, which is analyzing texts as they exist in relationship with other texts and social contexts. And honestly, this is a more realistic way of thinking about how we navigate the world of story and information. See, we're always comparing and contrasting, and it's through those comparisons and contrasts that we're generating meaning. As a matter of fact, I would go so far as to say that meaning is only produced in the relationship between two or more things. So far, we've been examining the relationships between parts of a single story. Now we're taking that up a notch to examine the relationship between multiple stories, multiple texts. So, when making comparisons, you first want to establish that the texts are worth comparing. This usually means establishing some form of connection between them. Sometimes these connections will be relatively straightforward and obvious, and other times you may have to make a case for it. But, this can lead to really cool ideas and maybe some out-of-the-box thinking, which is what we're looking for. So you might start with something like this. While it may seem like these two texts are quite similar, here is a key difference that unlocks how we understand them. Or it might look something like this. It may seem like these texts have little in common, but here is a commonality that reveals something important about the meaning in both texts. But the important thing here is to go beyond simply listing off interesting similarities and differences. You've all kind of experienced the high school compare and contrast essay, which basically boils down to these two texts are similar but different. And of course, you can say that about anything. All things are similar in some ways and different in other ways. We're looking to go beyond that, right? Your job is to let the relationships, the commonalities, the differences, inform an original argument which allows for a new and vivid interpretation of both the texts. One primary way that we're going to be thinking about comparison in this section is to simply ask, how do two texts tackle similar subjects or themes? So for example, when reading something like The Yellow Wallpaper, next to Take Me As I Am, Whoever I Am, which we read this week, you might of course notice the subject of women's mental health that they both share. And this would form your sort of underlying basis of comparison. But as you think about it more, you may notice some of the major differences, starting with social context and genre. And thinking through these differences may prove important to how we understand each of these texts. So, Take Me As I Am is a personal essay, and it was published in 2008, relatively recently in the grand scheme of things. Whereas The Yellow Wallpaper is a Gothic short story published in the 1890s. What do these differences reveal? Are there similarities in each text that seem to echo across time, revealing something more fundamental about the subject? Are there differences which can only be accounted for by the possibilities afforded to each woman by her time and by the constraints of her genre? These are just a couple of questions that we could start to ask to get the ball rolling on some of these comparisons. Of course, to really make this a fully fleshed out idea, we would have to dig into the text using close reading of both of these different stories. But these are the types of questions which can lead to a strong argument rooted in comparison. So, one important thing to remember about this kind of work is that it's important to still include the depth of analysis of each individual text that you did in your argumentative paper. In other words, you're still going to be close reading and interpreting specific sections of each text to develop meaning. The main difference is you're going to then synthesize them to produce new meaning rooted in the relationship between the texts, the comparisons, the contrasts. To guide you in this process, we'll be using a comparison worksheet, and it's going to help you to build connections between your two chosen texts. In this worksheet, you'll find textual evidence of comparison between your text, but you'll also be asked to hone in on the key differences and the nuances that exist within these comparisons. You'll be asked to not only demonstrate these comparisons and these contrasts, but to show what the comparison can reveal in terms of how we interpret the texts. And you'll be asked to draw connections between your different comparisons that you make so as to form a whole and interconnected argument. As with all the work that we do in this class, imagination is key. And finding interesting comparisons and interesting takeaways from these comparisons is what will, elevate your writing from a pretty standard compare and contrast essay to something which is actually contributing new meaning into the world. I'm happy to guide you along the way with any questions that you all have, from figuring out which texts you want to compare to actually developing those comparisons into an argument. That's all I have for you all today, though. Thank you for watching, and please reach out if you have any questions or concerns. Thanks, y'all.